signed an executive order aimed at blocking a growing wave of state-level artificial intelligence laws and replacing them with a single national standard. Trump has said that the U.S. needs one central source of approval, as the order gives the administration new authority to push back on what it calls overly strict state rules while still allowing measures focused on children's safety. Major AI companies, including OpenAI, Google, and Meta, support federal oversight, warning that differing state laws could slow innovation. But state leaders from both parties argue that they must act as Congress continues to stall on tech legislation. Florida and California are among states advancing their own AI safeguards, from privacy protections to rules addressing catastrophic risks and AI-generated deepfakes. Let's listen in.
Exciting right now, and we have a tremendous industry where we're leading by a lot. It's the AI, artificial intelligence. I always thought it should be SI, supreme intelligence, but I guess somewhere along the line they decided on the word artificial, and that's okay with me. That's up to them. It's a massive industry. We're leading China. We're leading everybody by a tremendous amount.
That's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with the U.S. a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws, and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
Hello and welcome, I'm Kriti Mehta and you're watching the Eurozone on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines this hour. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov says Moscow is unaware if US President Donald Trump will hold a meeting with Ukrainian and European Union officials. Russia claims it has taken control of the eastern Ukrainian city of Seversk in the Donetsk region. The city, heavily damaged after months of intense fighting, remains a strategic issue for both armies. Former Ukrainian Prime Minister Nikolai Azarov says Zelensky is unlikely to hold any election in Ukraine and is actively working to block their occurrence. Russia President Vladimir Putin has met with his counterparts at the Central Asia Summit in Turkmenistan, where he has praised the country for its neutral stand in the region. Mexico's Senate has approved the hikes to tariff rates imposed on several Asian countries, including India and China. The move is expected to hurt foreign imports, with rates up to 50% levied on different countries. According to a Japanese defense ministry release, Japan's defense minister Shinjiro Koizumi and his US counterpart Pete Hegseth spoke on the phone on Friday about the recent confrontation between Chinese and Japan's self-defense force fighter jets, as Tokyo said it did not seek to escalate the tension. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, while hosting Brunei's second Minister of Foreign Affairs, has shared that China is ready to work with Brunei to maintain high-level exchanges and collaborate on further acceleration of China-Brunei tensions. Gaza's 1.5 million displaced Palestinians are facing a new disaster as Storm Byron hits, flooding makeshift tents and causing a deadly exposure, including the death of an infant amid 2 years of Israel's relentless war and mass displacement. And let's start with the top focus this hour on Eurozone viewers. The Kremlin says it has no information whether US President Donald Trump plans to hold a meeting with the Ukrainian and European Union officials. Speaking to reporters, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said that Moscow simply doesn't know if such a meeting will take place, adding that the United States has not made any public decision. Pressed on what Russia expects from the potential talks, Peskov repeated that Moscow has no details and cannot speculate. When asked to clarify whom the meeting would involve, Peskov pushed back, questioning whether Trump had even decided to travel to Europe, telling reporters to read the news. His comments come as speculation swirls over possible diplomatic engagement involving Washington, Kyiv and the European Union, with Moscow maintaining it is not yet informed of any confirmed plans. And now joining us in this conversation is Ben Eris, who is a Russian journalist, joins us live from Berlin. Thank you, Ben, for joining us and taking time out to speak to us here at NewsX World. Ben, of course, the remarks from Kremlin are only coming after US President Donald Trump has signaled how his patience seems to have been running out with Kyiv, especially as far as the negotiations come. How likely is it that Trump will indeed meet with the European leaders? Of course, it's something that can only be speculated as of now, because Trump has clearly said it depends on how the European Union leaders move ahead with the peace proposal.
Trump's clearly frustrated. He's in a rush to get this deal done.
Yeah.
At the same time, as part of the new national security strategy, he's redefined the whole war as Europe's problem. And he's also said that he's not going to talk to anyone until a deal is virtually done. So this dithering, this uncertainty over this meeting, I think it's designed to be more pressure on Europe in order to push Ukraine towards accepting the deal that's on the table. There was a 27-point plan that was thrashed out at a Moscow meeting. In the last days, Ukraine and the EU have come back with a 20-point counteroffer. However, Zelensky's made several comments in the last day that suggest that he's come a lot closer to doing a deal. And the key comment that he made was that if Ukraine were to give up some territory, then there would have to be either elections or a referendum. The problem is that the Ukrainian constitution bans the president from giving any land away. But if he holds a referendum, then he can get the authority to do that. So now he's openly contemplating doing a deal, giving land away, making concessions. And that's the Putin must-have. He has to have that if the war is going to stop. So for me, this is a big step forward. And now we've got a meeting scheduled in Paris at the weekend. And that's going to be another round. But given that there really seems to be some forward movement in the negotiations, then Trump will get his condition that Europe and Ukraine will come much closer to the 27-point plan from Moscow. And at that point, if we're very close to a deal, then Trump will want to come in and sit at the table and close the deal and then claim yet another peace victory in his campaign to win a Nobel Prize.
Ben, do we expect the European leaders to also move ahead and budge a little bit in their demands for Kyiv? Because Trump has clearly signaled that talks will end up in a stalemate because of the European Union leaders and their pressure on Kyiv over the question of
Europeans,
ceding territory.
yeah. The Europeans are being sidelined. I mean, they've taken an impossibly hard line that when the original 28 points plan was drawn up, there was meetings in Geneva, and the European Union came back with several versions of their plans, which were just completely unacceptable to Moscow, and obviously so. It was not even concessions. They were hardening their line. Things like putting NATO troops into Ukraine, which Putin would just not accept. And really, at this point, it now falls to Zelensky to make the final decision. I think the rhetoric coming out of the EU, particularly the hardliners like the foreign policy representative Kallas and von der Leyen herself, to stick to the guns, not make any concessions. And they said to Zelensky specifically, he might betray you, don't trust him. But as I say, Zelensky is fighting a war. You were reporting on the problems in Pokrovsk. The financial problems are major. Ukraine faces a macroeconomic collapse at the start of next year if the EU can't come up with any more money, and that looks unlikely that they won't be able to come up with more money. And so Zelensky's up against it. And at the same time, his authority at home is being undermined by the enormous corruption scandal. So, as I say, we're in a key place now, and Zelensky's got to look at the states who are not going to support him. He's got to look at the EU, which is faltering in its support, maybe unable to support him, and decide whether he can fight on the battlefield by himself. That's a very tough decision. And given, as I said, that he seems to have made several big concessions, it looks like he's making the decision like, this war is unwinnable, there's no point going on. And so we better draw a line under it, and I'm going to try and get the best deal I possibly can from the Kremlin at this point now.
All right, thank you, Ben, for giving that opinion and helping us with your explanation. And we move on, viewers. Russia and Ukraine are issuing sharply conflicting claims over the control of Seversk in the Donetsk region as heavy fighting continues across multiple fronts. At a Kremlin meeting, Russia's top military commander Valery Gerasimov told President Putin that Russian forces had fully taken Seversk along with two nearby settlements, Kucharovka and Kurilovka. Now, but Ukraine's Operation Task Force East rejected that assertion, insisting Kiev's forces still hold Seversk and continue to repel most Russian infiltration attempts. Ukraine also claims control of the northern part of Pokrovsk. Russia's defense ministry says its forces conducted strikes across more than 150 locations over the last 24 hours, targeting energy facilities and temporary deployment points used by Ukrainian units and foreign fighters. It also reported taking control of Lyman in the Kharkiv region. Meanwhile, Ukraine says its air defenses tracked 154 aerial targets overnight, destroying or suppressing 85 of them. All right, viewers, latest developments now coming in as far as the annexation of territories are concerned. Russia's top military commander has said that Seversk has been taken over completely, along with two nearby settlements, Kacharovka and Kurilovka. Kremlin has made these remarks. However, Ukraine continues to reject these claims. In fact, Ukraine also claims control of the northern part of Pokrovsk. Statements have also come in from Russia's defense ministry, which says that its forces conducted strikes across more than 150 locations over the last 24 hours. And I now invite Ben to join us back into the discussion here. Ben, what information do you have as to how much of territory of Ukraine is now under Russian control, particularly over the question of Seversk, which Russia now claims to have taken over completely, along with two other neighboring areas, but Ukraine denies?
It's very confused, and to be honest, there's no really hard information. The fight is going backwards and forwards, and clearly Russia is making a huge push in order to clean out the defenses in the two cities, Prekos and the other one. And it's not going well. There were reports last week that Russia had taken 90% of Prekos and completely surrounded the little satellite city to the west of it. However, they sent in a big armored column day before yesterday in order to eject the remaining defenders, and they ended up in a huge firefight and losing a lot of territory back to the Ukrainians. And the problem here is that the drones are dictating this war in so much as if you send in a huge column of Russian soldiers, then you've concentrated people in the same place in a very visible way, and they just become targets for drones. And this means that to actually capture a city in the traditional way by sending in infantry to occupy it has become impossible. It's actually become a death sentence for those soldiers. And so I think we're now into this very fluid, unstable situation where Russia can't close the deal and actually definitively take a city very easily, because when it does go in there to try and flush out the Ukrainians have like 4 million drones now, and they've become very adept at flying them. But for Putin too, I mean, I said Trump is in a rush, that Putin is also in a rush, that he wants to close the military deal. He wants to be in the strongest position he can in the negotiations, with towns falling to Russia. And so this is actually a setback, and it gives Zelensky the hope that they can actually fight on, even without European and US support, simply by the bloodletting that goes on whenever Russia tries to move any troops around.
All right, do stay on with us, Ben. There's some more news now coming in from Ukraine, where the government bonds have risen today after Kyiv submitted a revised proposal to the United States aimed at ending the war. The country's 2029 bond climbed 1.8 cents to trade at 73 cents on the dollar, its highest level since February. Other bonds also gained between 0.6 and 1.3 cents. Officials say that Ukraine has shared the revised 20-point peace plan, which includes new ideas related to territorial issues and control of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. The bond rally also comes as European leaders make progress on measures to support Ukraine financially, adding momentum to the country's economic outlook as discussions on the updated peace proposal continue. And I now request a comment from Ben on the latest developments. Ben, the bonds seem to be rallying as of now based on the new proposal submitted by Zelensky, but how long is their momentum going to last, and what's the economic outlook for Ukraine speaking now?
That's very good news. The bond market rally, it's indicative the investors think, this is a real serious attempt to bring the war to the end. And if it does, then the bonds have been depressed. I mean, Ukraine is effectively in default. It's suspended all the payments with the agreement of the bondholders. And their price has been knocked to the bottom as a result. Now, if we think that the war might end, then the bonds are rallying, and they're still cheap compared to where they should be, should the war actually end. And so investors are taking a bet that this peace is going to be concluded. As for the Ukrainian economy, it's in a mixed state. Growth this year is going to come in at something over 5%, being driven by military spending. However, they've got enormous hole in the budget for next year, some $80 billion. And that's going to have to come from foreign funding. But that assumes the war continues. And if the war ends, then there will be a bounce back rally. And already part of the peace deals, and this again is helping the market sentiment, is that Trump is proposing to take the $300 billion of frozen Russian assets and use at least $100 billion in a joint US-Ukraine recovery fund. And so that's going to start a boom in construction, to repair all the damage. The trade will open up again. The grain exports will go unfettered to the rest of the market. And so the economy would rally really strongly if the war ends. If it doesn't end, exactly the opposite will happen. There won't be enough money. There's no money from the States. There won't be enough money from Europe. And Ukraine, the economists say, is facing a macroeconomic collapse in the first quarter, sometime between February and April. So there's everything to play for. But as you said, the bond market indicates that there's a lot of investors that think, there's going to be a positive outcome. And so they're taking their bets now.
All right. Thank you, Ben, for speaking to us and sharing that with us. And with that, viewers, we're now going to move on and tell you that former Ukrainian Prime Minister Nikolai Azarov has claimed that Zelensky is unlikely to hold a national election in Ukraine and is actively working to prevent them. Speaking in an interview, Azarov argued that election would mark the end of Zelensky's political career and said the Ukrainian leader would therefore do everything possible to avoid a national vote unless pressured by US President Donald Trump. According to Azarov, even if elections were held, the current wartime conditions would prevent any meaningful political shift and could result in a successor who, while technically legitimate, would lack the authority or capacity to negotiate effectively on behalf of Ukraine. Zelensky's presidential term officially expired on May 20th of last year, but Ukrainian authorities maintain that national elections cannot take place under martial law, which has been in effect since Russia's full-scale invasion and has been repeatedly extended. The debate intensified on December 9 when President Trump publicly called for Ukraine to proceed with elections, accusing Kyiv of using the conflict as a pretext for delay. In response, Zelensky has expressed readiness to hold a presidential vote but emphasized that key legislative reforms as well as security measures backed by the United States and the European Union are essential before any election can be conducted. And let's now track some news from Britain. Now, UK's economy contracted again in October, adding pressure on the Labour government as it works to revive growth. Official data shows GDP fell by 0.1%. Matching the decline seen in September and missing expectations of a slight rebound. While manufacturing picked up after earlier disruptions, overall activity slowed as businesses and consumers cut back on spending ahead of the national budget. Recent tax increases introduced to reduce government debt and strengthen public services have added to concerns about slower economic momentum. Economic projections released alongside the budget also downgraded growth expectation from 2026 through 29, signaling a more prolonged period of weakness. With unemployment rising and demand softening, analysts say the latest figures increase the likelihood that the Bank of England could respond with an interest rate cut next week. And we're now joined in by Mitali Nikore, who's an economist from New Delhi. But before she joins us, viewers, let's give you some more context. The unexpected contraction has in fact added pressure on the Labour government, which is working now to revive growth. The government's first budget in October featured large tax increases on businesses, which may have contributed to an economic slowdown. Now, despite the contraction, the economy managed to grow slightly over the last 3 months, driven by a 0.4% growth in the consumer sector, in the construction sector and 0.1% growth in the service economy. The Labour government's plans now include higher borrowing for infrastructure projects and a national wealth fund to drive growth in towns and cities. Now, the Bank of England is to decide on interest rate cuts next week, which could further impact the economy. It's a big shock to the UK economy, which has shrunk by 0.1% in October. This is as per the official figures. Despite the contraction, the economy managed to grow slightly over the last 3 months, however, driven by a 0.4% growth in the construction sector and 0.1% growth in the service economy. The latest GDP figures show the economy unexpectedly contracted and in fact followed weeks of leaks over potential tax cuts being eyed up by the Chancellor in her statement on November 26. In fact, in September as well, there was a 0.1% fall, and it is the 9th monthly GDP contraction since Labour government has come to power last year in July. The Office for National Statistics has revealed that the construction activity has fallen 0.6% month on month, while services fell 0.3%. And unfortunately, we're not joined in by our guest, but we now shift focus to news from France. The French indie game Clair Obscur Expedition 33 swept the annual Game Awards in Los Angeles, taking home a record 9 awards, including Video Game of the Year. The game, developed by Sandfall Interactive, began in 2020 as a passion project led by Guillaume Broch, who teamed up with ex-Ubisoft colleague Tom Guillermin to form the small studio in Montpellier in France. Sandfall later secured funding through a publishing deal with UK-based Kepler Interactive. Released in April 2025, Clair Obscur has sold 5 million copies worldwide. Despite competing with heavyweights such as Hideo Kojima's Death Stranding 2 and Nintendo's Donkey Kong Banana, Clair Obscur dominated categories including narrative, role-playing, and music score. The game's success has drawn international attention, with French President Emmanuel Macron praising the team for showcasing French creativity. And that's a wrap on the NewsX Eurozone. Stay tuned to NewsX World for all international news updates.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws, and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
Hello and welcome to NewsX World. I'm Kriti Mehta and you're watching Hollywood Calling. From celebrity scoops to film and music buzz, here's your quick look at what's making headlines in the entertainment world this week. Zootopia 2 and Five Nights at Freddy's 2 will battle for the number one spot at the box office, with Disney's animated hit projected to earn $24 to $26 million in its third weekend. The family film is nearing $1 billion globally. Beyonce, Venus Williams and Nicole Kidman will co-chair the 2026 Met Gala, marking a star-studded line-up for the event. The gala, raising funds for the Met's Costume Institute, will tie into the costume art exhibition. Jimmy Kimmel has signed a one-year deal with ABC, keeping him on Jimmy Kimmel Live through May 2027. This follows his return in September after a suspension over controversial remarks about Charlie Kirk's assassination. Miss Universe 2025 Fatima Bush dismissed claims that her win was rigged, denying any influence from her father or secret votes. The Miss Universe organization also confirmed no external group influenced the results. And viewers, the 2026 Met Gala is already generating excitement with the announcement of its co-chairs, global icons Beyonce, Venus Williams and Nicole Kidman. This marks the first time in a decade that Beyonce will attend the event, and fashion fans are eager to see what stunning look she will bring. Williams is a 7-time Grand Slam winner and Kidman, a 2-time co-chair, brings star power and from both the worlds of sports and film. The event will raise the funds for the Met's Costume Institute and will be linked to the upcoming costume art exhibition. The gala is expected to be an unforgettable night of fashion and spectacle, with stars vying for attention on and off the red carpet. And moving on, former Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and pop star Katy Perry have appeared to confirm their relationship by going Instagram official. Perry posted a carousel of photos last week featuring herself and Trudeau eating sushi while visiting Japan for her world tour, seemingly confirming the months-long rumors that they are in a relationship. This came 3 days after former Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida appeared to confirm the couple's relationship, posting a photo on X of them alongside himself and his wife, referring to Perry as Trudeau's partner in his caption. And now joining us in this conversation is Andrew Latham, who's a commentator on politics, joins us live from Minneapolis. Thank you, Andrew, for joining us. Now, given Katy Perry's global influence, could her relationship with Justin Trudeau open new opportunities for Canada in terms of international diplomacy or cultural exchange?
Well, the short answer is I think yes. The slightly longer answer is the reason I say yes is because Justin Trudeau now occupies that very important hybrid space between politics and pop culture, celebrity. He has, in a sense, for a long time, but since he left the Prime Minister's office and has deepened or intensified this relationship with Katy Perry, this new role is really quite prominent. And he has become a kind of global influencer in a way that he really wasn't as Prime Minister. It's adjacent to, but different than that role. So his ability now to advance Canada's interests, values, agenda is different than it was when he was Prime Minister, obviously, but is perhaps in some ways even more effective.
All right, and how might this relationship affect Trudeau's relationship with other world leaders, particularly in countries where celebrity influence is a major cultural force?
Well, it's clearly working in Japan, in the Japanese case. It's enhancing his profile, it's enhancing his ability to shake hands with foreign leaders and slap backs with foreign leaders and engage in that kind of camaraderie, which is a kind of diplomacy, a kind of politics. Again, occupying that hybrid space between politics. He's clearly, in a sense, still a spokesperson for Canada, but he's doing it as an influencer in that celebrity world as well. So I think this is not going to go down terribly well in some countries, but in other countries where celebrity culture is robust and strong, this works to his advantage, and to the extent that he channels Canadian values and interests, it works to Canada's advantage.
All right, and are there any potential concerns that this relationship could be seen as an attempt by Trudeau to appear more charming or likable rather than focusing on a substantive policy?
Yes, well, I think there are two camps. On the one hand, there are those who say, look, the guy's just getting on with his life. He's left office. He's entitled to a private life. If this relationship is part of that, so be it. Just let it happen. And then there are those who see this in slightly more Machiavellian terms, that this is him positioning himself quite deliberately in a post-prime ministerial space, that he can continue to be influential, powerful, if you like. And I don't know that anybody has the definitive answer to that. It could be either, it could be some combination of both. But one thing is for sure, Justin Trudeau is not leaving the international stage.
All right, well, I thank you, Andrew, for having this discussion with me here, but request you to stay on as we move on, viewers. Late night host Jimmy Kimmel has signed a one-year contract extension with ABC, keeping him on Jimmy Kimmel Live through May of 2027. Kimmel's extension follows his return to the network in September after a brief suspension due to controversial remarks about the assassination of conservative activist Charlie Kirk. The extension was agreed upon months ago but delayed to show respect for Stephen Colbert, whose The Late Show will end in 2026. The suspension came after FCC Chairman Brendan Carr criticized Kimmel for misleading viewers about Kirk's alleged shooter. He's set to testify before Congress next week. And I now request Andrew to join us back into the discussion here. Andrew, what does Kimmel's contract extension say about his role in the late-night television landscape? Does his return show that Trump's impact on the entertainment scene is diminishing?
Well, what is diminishing is the audience, first of all. But secondly, Kimmel occupies a very important and interesting place within that diminishing audience. Colbert was a little more heavy-handed. He was a little more overt in his politics, and I think that was off-putting and potentially problematic for the network. Kimmel has a lighter touch. He's, in my judgment, a funnier guy. He seems to resonate, even though he is making political points. There's political commentary, and here we see that hybrid space again, politics and pop culture intersecting, this time in late-night television in the United States. I think he's better at it. Bill Maher would be another figure who's in play here, a man of the left who increasingly is critical of the left, and that seems to have a very profitable audience as well. So, respect for Colbert, but his moment has come and gone. That's the judgment of the network. Jimmy Kimmel's moment was suspended for a brief period of time because of his comments around Charlie Kirk. But he's back because he has a product, if you like, that is in great demand, and the network understands this and is in the business of making money, and therefore is hanging on to Jimmy Kimmel.
And what's the broader impact of comedians and late-night hosts discussing political figures and incidents in a way that blurs the line between comedy and political commentary?
Well, this is one of the new spaces for political commentary. I think a lot of Americans, not the majority, but a lot of Americans really get their politics this way. And if they don't get the facts this way, they certainly get the spin, the interpretation of the facts this way. These comedians tend to confirm or reaffirm one's prior political commitments, but they do so in a way that resonates, first of all, and makes people laugh, which is a good thing. And so this increasingly, it's not just op-ed pieces in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal. It's not just commentaries on Sunday morning talk shows. It's not even primetime news. It is this late night space occupied by very smart, very witty people who are able to get their political message across in ways that are obviously political, but come across as entertainment, as comedy, as something lighter than the everyday politics. And at this moment in American history, with this administration and everything that's going on within and beyond the country, this is a very welcome respite of sorts for many, many Americans.
All right. Thank you, Andrew, for joining us here on Hollywood Calling at NewsX World. With that, I'd let you go. Viewers, moving on, social media influencer Johnson Wen, known as Pajama Man for his disruptive stunts, has been ejected from a Lady Gaga concert in Brisbane in Australia. This follows his deportation from Singapore weeks after rushing Ariana Grande at the Wicked premiere. Wen, who has a history of invading stages and sporting events for online attention, was reportedly identified and removed by security at Suncorp Stadium before the concert. And nominations for the Golden Globe Awards 2026 are in, with Frankenstein, Hamlet and Sinners nominated for the Best Dramatic Film. One battle after another, starring Leonardo led with nominations in 9 categories in film. Meanwhile, British TV drama Adolescence continues its sweep with nods for Stephen Graham, Owen Cooper, Erin Doherty and Ashley Waters. Other programs shortlisted for awards are fan favorites The White Lotus, Severance and Slow Horses, plus Abbott Elementary, Hacks and The Bear. This year's edition features 28 categories, including a newly introduced annual honor for Best Podcast, marking the Globe's continued expansion into emerging storytelling formats. The 83rd Golden Globe Awards will take place Sunday, January 11, 2026, with comedian Nikki Glaser returning as host after her successful stint in 2025. And this weekend, Zootopia 2 and Five Nights at Freddy's 2 will fight for the #1 spot at the North American box office. Zootopia 2 is projected to earn between $24 million and $26 million in its third weekend, bringing its global total close to $1 billion. Meanwhile, Five Nights at Freddy's 2 is targeting $18 million to $22 million after a massive $64 million opening last weekend. Newcomer Ella McKay is expected to debut with just $4 million, directed by James L. Brooks. The political dramedy stars Emma McKay but faces tough competition. The weekend marks a calm before the holiday rush, with big films like Avatar, Fire and Ash set to hit theaters on December 19. Moving on, 16 years after the original Avatar Fire and Ash premieres in Los Angeles, director James Cameron and stars Sam Worthington, Zoe Saldana and Sigourney Weaver led the red carpet. Set in a volcanic biome, the film introduces the Ash people, a new Na'vi tribe caught in a tense conflict. Jake Sully and Neytiri face grief and moral dilemmas as the story explores faith, vengeance, and loss. Early reviews call it a virtual feast and the strongest of the trilogy, praising the action and emotional depth. Trinity Bliss's performance as Took, the Sully family's youngest, has captivated audiences. Avatar: Fire and Ash releases worldwide on December 19 in multiple languages. And Miley Cyrus has confirmed her engagement to musician Max Morando. The pop star was spotted wearing a gold and diamond ring at the Avatar: Fire and Ash premiere in Los Angeles. Cyrus, who was previously married to actor Liam Hemsworth, they divorced in 2019. She met Morando on a blind date and the couple have been together for 4 years now. Morando is a drummer with LA band Lily, which performed at Cyrus's New Year's Eve party in 2022. Cyrus said the relationship has helped her grow and praised Morando for being supportive. Her latest song, Dream as One, is featured in the new Avatar film, and she has no plans to tour due to her mental health concerns. And despite not actively releasing much music, Rihanna's last album, Anti, continues to break records. Rihanna's Anti has officially hit a massive milestone, 500 weeks on the Billboard 200, cementing itself as the first album by a black female artist to ever reach this achievement. Nearly a decade after its release, the project is still shaping conversation, playlists, and the sound of an entire era. This makes her the first black female artist to reach this milestone in the chart's history. Despite releasing several songs over the years and headlining the 2023 Super Bowl halftime show, Rihanna has not released an album since Anti. And Miss Universe 2025 Fatima Bosch is defending her life-changing win. The 27-year-old Miss Mexico has addressed the drama that's unfolded since the November 21 coronation, including claims that the competition was rigged in her favor. Bosch officially responded to former Judge Omar Harfouch's accusation that Bosch's win was fake and that her father, an executive at the Mexican state-owned oil company Pemex, has business ties to Miss Universe owner Raul Rocha. But Bosch rejected the argument that a brave moment led to her being handed the win. Last but not the least, Bosch has also shut down the claims that she is considering giving up her title. Moving on, Hollywood star Hugh Jackman has thrown his full support behind his co-star from the upcoming film Song Sung Blue, actor Kate Hudson's bid for an Academy Award, making a strong case for why he believes she deserves to finally take the Golden Statuette home. Now, standing beside her at the 35th Annual Gotham Awards in New York City, the 58-year-old actor publicly championed Kate Hudson as a frontrunner this award season. However, Kate Hudson has not been nominated for an Oscar since her breakout role in Almost Famous earned her a Best Supporting Actress nod in 2001. Chris Rock kicked off the Gotham Awards by poking fun at Hollywood's superhero obsession, championing original stories. Guillermo del Toro passionately defended human artistry in filmmaking, delivering a strong anti-AI message. The ceremony celebrated independent cinema with Paul Thomas Anderson's One Battle After Another taking home Best Feature, signaling a promising awards season. Rock's moment landed because it felt honest to the viewers, as he joked about how independent films have changed, hinting that budgets matter less than originality today. He's also highlighted that he loves a multiverse, but not everyone needs a cape. And that's a wrap on Hollywood Calling for this week. Your dose of stars, style, and stories returns soon.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws and how can we work together?
Hello and welcome. I'm Kriti Mehta and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has lashed out at the US raid on a Venezuelan oil tanker. The US maintains that the seizure of the tanker took place due to the fact that it was ferrying sanctioned oil between Venezuela and Iran. Russian President Vladimir Putin has met with his counterparts at the Central Asia Summit in Turkmenistan, where he has praised the country for its neutral stand in the region. Mexico's Senate has approved the hikes to tariff rates imposed on several Asian countries, including India and China. The move is expected to hurt foreign imports, with the rates up to 50% levied on different countries. Thailand's king has endorsed a royal decree to dissolve the lower house of parliament, paving the way for a general election early next year. The decree was countersigned by Prime Minister Sharnavikaru, cited his administration's status as a minority government as the primary reason for the dissolution. According to a Japanese Defense Ministry release, Japan's Defense Minister Shinjiro Koizumi and his US counterpart Pete Hegseth spoke on the phone on Friday about the recent confrontation between Chinese and Japan's self-defense force fighter jets, as Tokyo said it did not seek to escalate the tension. However, China blames Japan that it is escalating tension. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, while hosting Brunei's second Minister of Foreign Affairs, has shared that China is ready to work with Brunei to maintain high-level exchanges and collaboration to further accelerate China-Brunei ties. The Chinese Foreign Ministry has announced that Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi will visit the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia and Jordan from today to 16th of December. This trip comes as he was invited by all the three Arab nations and has accepted the invitation. Gaza's 1.5 million displaced Palestinians are facing a new disaster as Storm Byron hits, flooding makeshift tents and causing deadly exposure, including the death of an infant, amid 2 years of Israel's relentless war and mass displacement. And viewers, let's start with the top focus. Russia has launched another overnight strike on Ukraine's energy grid, this time targeting key facilities in the southern Odessa region. Local officials say the drone attack sparked fires and knocked out power across several communities near Ukraine's main seaports. The country's largest private power company, DTEK, reports one of its substations was hit along with another facility owned by a separate operator. Crews have restored electricity to around 40,000 customers, but 90,000 remain in the dark. Ukraine has been facing a new wave of strikes on power plants and transport hubs as winter deepens and the war nears its fourth year. In response, the government has approved new measures to conserve electricity nationwide. And I'd now like to welcome Professor Veselin Popovsky, who is a professor and vice dean at the Jindal Global Law School. Joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you, Professor Popovsky, for joining us here at NewsX World. Now, how do you see the developments shaping up? Is it likely that Trump is going to meet with the European leaders so that a conclusion could be arrived at the peace deal finally? And do you also see it likely that Ukraine might host its election? Because there are voices coming in from within the country that Zelensky may not want to hold the elections.
The first question about meeting with European leaders, I don't think it's likely to happen soon. They are talking every day, but the physical meeting might not be already feasible in the remaining 2 weeks before Christmas. But there will be discussions between Washington and the European partners, obviously. Although, you know, there are voices in Washington that Europe is declining and the United States needs to quit NATO. These are, voices that are not serious. Such decision can only be taken by the US Congress, and the majority in the US Congress all the Democrats plus half of the Republicans will never allow any exit from NATO. Regarding the peace deal, we don't see cooperation from Vladimir Putin whatsoever. The problem of the peace is one man, Vladimir Putin, who can end this war tomorrow or today with a phone call to his general just to say stop the fire. Everybody demanded this, including Donald Trump, for the last 11 months. Putin ignores that and talks about historical root causes and everything else, but doesn't order his troops to stop the fire. And that's very clear. Well, apart from the US administration, everybody in the world already understands that. There is no peace until Vladimir Putin stops the fire. Your last point about elections in Ukraine. Zelensky is very clear. Get out of my territory, I will do elections the next day. I cannot do elections when bombs are falling and shelling my cities and people are dying from Russian attacks. It's logistically impossible. There are electricity cuts because of the Russian targeting of civilians in Ukraine. Zelensky doesn't mind elections. He would have done election last year if there was no Russian soldiers on his territory killing civilians. It's very clear. Russia should go home and I will do elections the next day. He doesn't worry about elections. He might not even run for the elections. He might remain the hero of the last 4 years fight against Russia and decide to remain a hero without running for the next term. Ukraine is a democratic country. There was 6 presidents in Ukraine for the time when Vladimir Putin is power in Russia. Elections in Ukraine are something very normal. They are fair and free. It doesn't matter who wins the next election. Could be Zelensky, could be Zaluzhny, could be Ermak or anybody else. And it will not matter. Whoever wins the next Ukrainian elections will do exactly what Zelensky did over the last 4 years. Very clear.
All right. Well, do stay on with us, Professor. There's some more news that's coming in and I'd like your opinion on that as well. Viewers, there's news now from Bulgaria, whose parliament has voted unanimously to accept the resignation of Rosen Zelyaskov, the government which had taken office in January 2025. In the 240-member National Assembly, the vote was 227 in favor, coming from all 9 parliamentary groups and 4 non-aligned MPs. Zelyaskov has announced the government's resignation on December 11 amid mass protests targeting the ruling majority, including movement and rights and freedoms. New Beginning leader Delian Pivsky and JBUDF leader Poyki Borisov. Meanwhile, Raya Nazarian, Speaker of the National Assembly, has responded. Let's listen into what he had to say.
Установете гласуването, посочете резултата. Гласували 227 народни представители, за са 227, няма против, няма въздържали се. Предложението е прието. С това изчерпахме и точка първа. Давам 10 минути почивка, след което ще започне парламентарният контрол.
All right. And I'd now request Professor Popovsky to join us back into the discussion here. Professor, of course, the government has fallen down, but the protests continue. What's next that's going to pacify the public in Bulgaria? There are huge charges of corruption on the government that resigned.
Correct. The protests will continue until the kind of assurance that the next election will be free and fair. The problem with the last elections was basically buying the votes by 2 of the biggest parties. You mentioned them, GERB and the Movement for Rights of Freedom. So those 2 leaders, Borisov and Pevsky, are the target of those protests. If they go, the protest will stop. Again, they are quite powerful in their own parties. And it's the question of their members of these parties, whether they want to continue with those 2 corrupted leaders, or the parties would like to clean their circles by removing them from power. That will be seen in the next couple of months. The elections will be scheduled most possibly for the second week of March. And until those, in the next 2 months, 3 months, we will see developments in the political system, and mostly if those two corrupted politicians, Borisov and Seversk, remain, which will mean more protests, and if they are removed from their parties, the protests may stop and expect fair and free elections in March.
And Professor, given that the protests and the coming down of the government had happened at a time when a country was to join the Eurozone, how is that going to affect Bulgaria?
No, it's not going to affect anything. It's already decided. Basically, the euro will start on 1st of January. People will get their salaries in euro. Over several months, they can return the Bulgarian currency, exchange it with the absolutely. No, these are again voices from those corrupted leaders who are trying to scare the population that that will affect negatively the economy, the salaries, the prices. These are basically voices to scare the people. Nothing of this will happen. Decision is made. Everything is clear. The euro will start with 1st of January, and nothing to worry about. That's the answer on that one.
Okay, so no political uncertainty as far as the euro membership is concerned, is what you say. Thank you, Professor Popovsky, for joining us and sharing your perspective with us here at News World. And if you was moving on to some news from Turkey, let's tell you that the United States and Turkey are engaged in talks over the removal of US sanctions and obstacles preventing Ankara's return to the F-35 fighter jet program. However, no changes have been made regarding Turkey's possession of the Russian S-400 air defense systems, which led to Washington removing Turkey from the program in 2020. The US calls the S-400 a security threat, and US law prohibits Turkey from operating both the S-400s and the F-35 jets. While discussions continue, US Ambassador to Ankara, Tom Barrack, reaffirmed that Turkey cannot rejoin the F-35 program while it maintains the S-400. Despite this, Turkey remains hopeful that these issues can be resolved under President Trump's second term. The Turkish Defense Ministry has emphasized that ongoing diplomatic talks aim to lift sanctions and resolve the situation through mutual dialogue, benefiting bilateral relations. And I'm now joined in by Alison Matler, former AP Bureau Chief in Romania, joins us live from Bucharest. Thank you, Alison, for joining us once again here at News World. Alison, what's your perspective on these developments that are coming in? Turkey says no change in Russian S-400s.
Turkey is a major regional military power with a very interesting geostrategic position. It's next to the Middle East. Its borders all those countries of Iraq, and it's also partly European, and it's a major member of NATO. It's a very important, a key member of NATO. So Turkey wants to keep its options open. At the beginning of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, it was offering its soil for territory for talks between the Ukrainians and the Russians, actually to not a great success, but it was seen as a country that could host both the Russians and the Ukrainians. So I see Turkey as wanting to keep its options open and keep its military as strong as it can, both by these Russian jets, the S-400s, and the American F-35s, which are more modern. But the United States law does not allow for Turkey to possess both Russian and American fighter jets. So, but Turkey is pushing it and trying to do it through dialogue and negotiations.
Is there any success that it can expect in these negotiations? Because Trump and the US clearly see the S-400 as a security threat.
At this moment, I don't think so. I don't know what Turkey can offer the United States, which would be of great use. Maybe, I don't know. We'll see, as there's a lot of there's a block over the ending of Russia's war on Ukraine. I don't know whether behind the scenes Turkey can offer something on that, or it's something else that will be of security interest to the United States. If it has something significantly important to offer, it's possible these sanctions can be circumvented. But at the moment, I don't see any chance of that happening from these talks. But I don't think Turkey will give up. The Turks are very skilled negotiators. They're very patient. They think long term. I don't see them giving up. But at the moment, it's clear we have no breakthrough. Turkey, Ankara itself has admitted that.
All right, Alison, thanks for your opinion on this. Do stay on. There's some more news as far as the US is concerned. Viewers, the United States has imposed fresh sanctions on 6 more ships said to be carrying Venezuelan oil a day after seizing a tanker off the country's coast. Sanctions have also been placed on some of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro's relatives and businesses associated with what Washington calls his illegitimate regime. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt told reporters the seized vessel, called the Skipper, had been involved in illicit oil shipping and would be taken to an American port. Meanwhile, Caracas has described it as an act of international piracy. This marks a sharp escalation in the United States pressure campaign against Maduro, which has seen dozens killed in strikes on boats alleged to have been carrying drugs from Venezuela. In recent months, American warships have been moving into the region. And I now request Alison to join us back into the discussion here. Alison, let's start off with the very basic. Did the US have the rights to seize these weapons in international waters just on suspicion of them carrying illicit drugs?
It is unclear. That is something that a court can decide. Obviously, the Americans will argue that they were perfectly within their legal rights, and supporters of Maduro will argue something opposite. I noticed you said in your report about it was legal piracy. Now that is not. It is not piracy on legal terms. It's perhaps a rhetoric rather than legal, but. Obviously, Maduro and Caracas have to fight back. What is clear is America is putting the pressure on Venezuela. It's trying to tighten the oil exports and, in fact, put a stop to them and a regime change, which is something Maduro has long been declared an illegitimate president, not just by America, but also by the European Union.
And what do you think is going to shape Trump's policy towards Maduro particularly? We were seeing him closing the Venezuelan airspace, calling him an illegitimate leader, and then also offering support to Machado. She herself has claimed that it was with US support that she ended up in Norway.
Yes. I think Trump is putting all pressure possible, and he's keeping his cards close to the chest. We don't know whether there'll be any sort of on-the-ground operation, but he wants the Maduro regime ousted, and he probably thinks it's been illegitimate in his mind for long enough, and it's time to take firm action. And by obviously impounding, seizing these ships is a way of putting the screws on Maduro's government administration regime, whatever you want to call it, so that it applies economic pressure. So he's using that as a first step, but whether it will escalate to military intervention is unclear. But he definitely seems, the Trump administration definitely seems very determined to stop this export of sanctioned oil to China and Iran.
And where do we see Venezuela gathering support from against its fight against Trump?
Well, their traditional allies, I suppose, China, Iran, that they will get support from them, and Trump will get support. He should do for. I mean, he had an argument with the European Union just a couple of days ago, but he will get support from the European Union, which is also calls the Maduro regime illegitimate. But yes, Venezuela will have to rely on its traditional allies, its traditional political and economic allies like Iran, like China.
All right, Alison, for now, thank you for joining us. We'll see how that confrontation goes from here. But for now, viewers, let's move on. There's now news coming in regard to Google. Now, Papua New Guinea has announced that Google is building 3 subsea internet cables fully funded by Australia under the Puk Defence Treaty. The $120 million project links northern and southern Papua New Guinea and Bougainville, strengthening the nation's digital backbone. Papua New Guinea's acting Information and Communications Technology Minister Peter Siamalili says the cables boost digital security, reduce reliance on single points of failure, and attract global tech investment. The project comes as Australia and the US seek to counter China's growing influence in the region. Under the treaty, Australian defence personnel gain access to Papua New Guinea's communication systems. Google also plans a data hub on Australia's Christmas Island, with new cables connecting it to Africa, Asia, and key Australian defence bases. Australia and the United States continue to deepen defence and digital ties with Papua New Guinea, reinforcing Indo-Pacific stability. And now moving on, viewers, Nigeria and Benin say that they will act swiftly against any threats to democracy in West Africa after authorities successfully prevented an attempted coup in Benin. Nigeria's Foreign Affairs Minister Yusuf Tugar praised the rapid response, calling it a model for how the region should react whenever democratic rule comes under pressure. Tugar noted that Nigeria's own security challenges are tied to instability across West Africa and the Sahel, pointing to the fallout from the collapse of Libya's Gaddafi regime and ongoing conflicts in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. He said the swift intervention in Benin was shaped by lessons learned from slower responses in earlier crises. Benin's Foreign Minister Bakari said the episode shows ECOWAS remains committed to democratic governance, highlighting the united stance of Presidents Bola Ahmed Tinubu and Patrice Talon. The pledge comes as the region continues to grapple with a wave of military coups since 2020. Let's listen in.
Nigeria's internal problems are inextricably linked to the external problems. So we would not be doing ourselves any good if Republic of Benin has a problem and we don't help in tackling it and tackling it decisively. The insecurity problem that we're facing today, like I said, is a regional problem. It is a Sahelian problem, it is a Lake Chad Basin problem, and the factors that are affecting us are mostly exogenous. The security problem we're facing today is tied to the dysfunctioning of Libya, the fall of the Gaddafi regime. It is tied also to the conflict in the Sahel and the fight against terrorism in the Sahel region, in Mali, in Burkina Faso, in Niger, and beyond.
It was important for all of us within our community, and especially for the two leaders of Benin and Nigeria, so respectively Their Excellency President Bola Ahmed Tinubu of Nigeria and President Patrice Talon of Benin, to show clearly that ECOWAS region is still an area where democracy prevails. This is very important, and we show that in our region, in our environment, we cannot accept those attempts to democracy.
And viewers, thousands of Congolese refugees are arriving in Burundi, escaping violent clashes between M23 rebels and the Congolese military in South Kivu. The M23 rebels, who are backed by Rwanda, recently seized the strategic city of Uvira, forcing civilians to flee across the border into Burundi. Between December 5 and 11, the UNHCR has recorded 40,000 new arrivals, many of whom are being housed in overcrowded and unsanitary transit camps such as Kansega. Refugees report harsh conditions, including a lack of water, sanitation, and shelter. Many have endured long, dangerous journeys, with some losing family members to violence along the way. Aid agencies are struggling to meet the growing demand for assistance. Local resources are overwhelmed and critical shortages of food and medical supplies persist. UNHCR and local authorities are calling for urgent international support as the crisis deepens, with fears that the violence may spread further south along the Tanganyika.
Il n'y en a pas de l'eau à boire, monsieur. Il n'y en a pas même de toilettes. Il n'y en a pas quoi il s'agit-il. Pour le moment, les peuples sont en train de souffrir. Vous savez, il y a l'engouement, beaucoup de populations qui sont ici, des Congolais, des Congolaises qui sont des enfants. Mais nous manquons même des toilettes, ce qui c'est catastrophique. Quand vous retournez dans ces petites forêts, vous allez voir, il y a des cacas qui sont là. Mais ce sont des quoi? Notre vie et notre santé est toujours en danger. C'est ça ce que nous constatons.
Niko hapa kuanzia juzi siyakula. Kisi nilikimbia na mpaka saa jana ndio nipata msamaria kanipatia bui nikakunywa. Siatia hata chakula mkinyi. Mimi ndio niko nakunywa nisikie kama sauti itatoka. Ndio vile baba, mimi naomba mnisaidie na mimi baba yangu mnitafutie baba watoto. Kama bako kwa neema ya Mungu ni bapate. Kama habako basi juu mtu hata force venye vinashindikana, lakini bora na mimi mnisaidie baba yangu.
And that's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for all international news updates from around the world.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN
Hello and welcome. I'm Kriti Mehta and you're watching Deep Dive on NewsX World. Tonight we're breaking down a major shift in global diplomacy that could reshape international power dynamics as we know it. Washington has been abuzz with the notion of a new global forum, what's being called the Core 5 or C5, potentially replacing traditional multilateral organizations like the G7. Now, the idea has stirred controversy and raised questions across the globe. What exactly is the Core 5? And why is the US considering such a radical departure from established norms? The Core 5 is a proposed platform that would include the United States, China, Russia, India, and Japan. These countries, all major powers with populations over 100 million, would meet regularly on key issues. The concept suggests sidelining Europe and creating a new, more pragmatic forum focused on global issues that directly affect these powers, starting with security in the Middle East. India's inclusion is particularly interesting. It would find itself in a delicate position, balancing its strategic ties with the US while also engaging with China and Russia. The question is, how will India navigate such tensions? The US seems to be moving away from traditional European alliances. And in fact, the G7, which has long been a key platform for economic and security coordination, is feeling the impact. Tension within the G7 has grown, particularly over trade, China and Russia. While the group still tackles global issues like Ukraine and energy security, the US and others are questioning its effectiveness. This shift is fueling the rise of the Core 5, a potential alternative to the G7. But here's where it gets really interesting. The Core 5 seems to sideline Europe entirely, reflecting a broader trend in US foreign policy. The White House reportedly envisions Europe facing civilizational erasure due to immigration and societal changes, potentially positioning Russia as the dominant power on the continent. This would be a dramatic departure from past US policies where European unity was seen as a pillar of Western strength. Reports suggest that this idea gained momentum after the US began emphasizing a shift towards deal-making diplomacy, prioritizing direct engagement with major powers over the traditional multilateral frameworks. That's why the Core 5 could be seen as a natural evolution of Trump's America First policy, centered around pragmatic, power-based politics rather than value-based alliances. And let's not forget Trump's style. He's always had a fondness for working with strongmen, focused on what's best for the US and sometimes sidelining traditional European and international allies. This Core 5 would be right up his alley. And then there's the potential for conflict within the Core 5 itself. Chinese President Xi Jinping and US President are locked in a fierce competition for a global influence. Most recently, China and Japan have been involved in a diplomatic tiff of its own in regards to the recognition of Taiwan. Meanwhile, the Russia-Ukraine war rages on. Energy sites are under attack while the civilian death toll keeps mounting. Now, how will these countries, each with distinct regional goals, work together in a forum like C5? What happens when their interests clash? And what will this mean for global diplomacy, and what role will the United States play as it leaves Europe and old allies behind? Joining us on this discussion is now Madhav Nalapat, who's an editorial director with the Sunday Guardian, joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you, Mr. Nalapit, for joining us. We appreciate you taking time out to speak to us in this detailed discussion. I'll start by asking my first question to you, sir. Could the Core 5 replace the G7 as a global power forum, and how will other global powers, especially Europe and the NATO, react to the Core 5?
Well, look, I'd like to point out that the gross national product of the European countries is steadily falling compared to the gross national product of the Asian countries, which are already much bigger. And that disproportion is only going to increase because your countries are hardly growing at all. The problem is that, now it's not the G7 anymore, it's the G6. Trump has in effect pulled away from it. But the fact is that this G6, they're obsessed with one issue, and that's Ukraine. And they're therefore obsessed with Russia. Whereas Donald Trump has got a very correct point of view, the same point of view as Prime Minister Modi, that Russia should be brought in to an alliance, not the stranger, not be the enemy, the way it's being treated in Europe. So I personally feel it's a very good idea, except that, as you correctly point out, I don't think the Chinese belong to that. I would help make it a quad, 4 countries minus China, for a simple reason. The Chinese want to compete and overcome the United States in very many metrics, including gross national product. And if they do so, it's going to be a very, very difficult situation for the US and especially its economy, which Donald Trump is focusing on. Therefore, in my view, 5 is one too many, but 4 would be excellent. And if you can get the Russians to move, I think it'll be a great idea. And I think there's no reason why they shouldn't move, because the Chinese have not helped them at all in the Ukraine war, barring, of course, giving them money in exchange for Russian oil. The fact of the matter is that the Chinese have got excellent relations with all the European countries that are fighting Russia, that are enemies of Russia, and the Russians are noticing it. So very honestly, it's a very good idea, except to call it the best idea would be to make it a quad and exclude China from that list.
All right, sure. And for years, the US and the West have positioned themselves as the global champions of civilization and human rights, often even interfering in the affairs of other nations. How does the West sidelining in the Core 5 challenge this narrative and expose the hypocrisy in its self-proclaimed role as the moral compass of the world?
Look, in the first place, I don't think there's any inferior or superior in the international order. I don't think people of any one ethnicity, European ancestral ethnicity, can consider themselves to be a cut above the rest of the world. No question about it. Several countries in the rest of the world are doing far better than the Europeans are doing. And if you look at the United States, you'll find that all ethnicities are doing quite well there. And it's a tribute to the United States that this is happening. It's also happening in Britain. It's also happening in some other countries as well. So I'd like to say that this idea that Europe is the central piece of global gravity is wrong. Today it's Asia that's the centerpiece of global gravity. And from that point of view, Trump is perfectly right in moving from priority to the European continent to the Asian continent. I think this basically reflects that, for a simple reason that Russia is both an Asian and a European power, and the US is independent in its own right. So the fact of the matter is, there's only looking reality squarely in the eye, and I think it's a very good move if it is carried to its conclusion, provided, as I said, with the caveat that China does not belong in this kind of a grouping. And with that caveat, I would say it's an excellent.
Sure, point taken. But let's talk about India's inclusion. It's obviously pivotal given its balancing act between the US, China and Russia. How can India now manage its strategic ties with both US and Russia? Already has been an impending issue for India, particularly given their competing interests in the region.
Look, the fact of the matter is that President Trump, from early on, even during his campaign, even during his previous campaign, he was talking of bringing Russia into the camp of allied countries. And I think it's a very good idea. I mean, the fact is that Russia should belong to that kind of an alliance. I mean, if you look at the Chinese, they are people who take advantage of every situation. Now, Russia, for example, the European, many of the countries are fighting them, but in all of these countries, the Chinese are very active and very friendly. So, quite honestly, I don't think there'll be any reason for Russia not to come aboard. And in my personal view, it's an excellent idea, provided China is kept out of it, for a simple reason that China is competing with the US. It is hostile to India, hostile to Japan. So, with that caveat in mind, I would say it's a wonderful idea.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Nalapit, for joining us in this discussion. We appreciate you taking time out. And viewers, that was all for this episode of Deep Dive, but stay tuned for more.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
Welcome to Deep Dive on NewsX World. I'm Kriti Mehta. Now today we're breaking down a decision that will affect everything from your rent to your loan payment to the global markets. The US Federal Reserve has cut interest rates for the third time this year, but this time the move has exposed deep divisions inside America's most powerful economic institution. And it's happening at a moment when prices are rising, the job market is cooling, and the president is pushing hard for even more cuts. So what does this really mean for everyday Americans? And who exactly is the economy working for? Let's dive in. US Fed Chief Jerome Powell has come up with the new cuts. The Fed has lowered its key lending rate by 0.25 percentage points to a range of 3.5% to 3.75%, the lowest in 3 years. The decision wasn't unanimous. 3 Fed officials broke ranks, a sign of a rising uncertainty about where the economy is headed. And that economy is flashing warning signs. The US job market is losing momentum. The employment rate has ticked up to 4.4% and companies are slowing their hiring. At the same time, prices remain elevated. Inflation is at 3% above the Fed's target. And for families, the pain is most visible in daily essentials. Grocery prices are up 2.7% over the past year. Electricity and natural gas prices have spiked. Vehicle insurance has seen double-digit increases. Housing costs remain one of the biggest financial burdens. American households are feeling the squeeze even as wage growth struggles to keep up. So what is this rate cut supposed to achieve? The Fed hopes that lower borrowing costs will stimulate business investments, support hiring, and avoid a deeper economic slowdown. But there's a risk. Cheaper credit can also fuel more inflation, which Americans are already struggling with. And that's why the Fed is so divided. Here's what the Fed Chair Jerome Powell has said. Listen in.
Conditions in the labor market appear to be gradually cooling, and inflation remains somewhat elevated. In support of our goals, in light of the balance of risks to employment and inflation, today the Federal Open Market Committee decided to lower our policy interest rate by a 1/4 percentage point. As a separate matter, we also decided to initiate purchases of shorter-term Treasury securities solely for the purpose of maintaining an ample supply of reserves over time, thus supporting effective control of our policy rate.
But one person wants deeper, faster cuts. The President of the United States. President Donald Trump criticized the move, saying the cuts should have been at least doubled. Listen in.
The head of the Federal Reserve is a stiff, and you fight that. It's amazing. We fight that, and yet interest rates are going down, except with him, not too much. He did a rather small number that could have been doubled, at least doubled. And that's the other thing. I think the rates for the United States are always the lowest in the world, because without us, there is no world.
So why is he pushing so hard? Analysts point to 3 key reasons. Political timing. Lower rates can boost growth in key sectors before elections. Market performance. Trump often measures his success through stock market levels. And short-term economic stimulus. Cheap money can create the appearance of a stronger economy. Now, this puts him directly at odds with Powell's cautious approach. But there's another question looming over all of this. Who actually benefits when rates come down? Here's where we talk about a less visible layer of the American economy. How the rich hoard wealth and why rate cuts often help the top more than the middle. In the US, the rich don't hoard cash in vaults. They build and preserve wealth through investments and a tax system filled with advantages. Let's break it down. Tax avoidance and loopholes. Complex structures minimize taxes. Low capital gains. Stocks and real estate taxed less than wages. Borrowing against assets. Avoid selling and paying taxes. Trusts and estates pass on wealth largely tax-free. Real estate depreciation cuts taxable income. Investments. Stocks, bonds, private equity grow faster than wages. Wealth defensive industry. Lawyers and accountants protect fortunes. Political influence. Lobbying keeps the system favorable. And in this context, hoarding is metaphorical, concentrating wealth in ways that limit its flow back into the broader economy. Analysts warn this intensifies inequality and poses social risks. Now, when the Fed cuts rates, asset owners benefit first, not wage earners. Stocks climb, real estate gains, and cheaper credit favors those who already have wealth. A Fed trying to avoid a slowdown. A president pushing for bigger cuts, rising everyday costs. Now, joining us in this discussion is Gerald Alfil, who's an economist and joins us live from Dubai. Thank you, Gerard, for speaking to us here at NewsX World. We appreciate you taking time out for us.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon to you. Gerard, I'll start with my first question to you. What do you think, firstly, are the key takeaways from Powell's presser?
Well, it shows that there might be, they expect a slowdown in the economy in the coming years. You mentioned stock market performances. In fact, Dow Jones Index and NASDAQ have been performing very well in the last 3, even 5 years. And this heat cannot continue. There was definitely pressure from President Trump, and it looks like the air gets thinner and thinner. I would like to quote Mr. Sergio Ermotti, the group CEO of UBS Bank, one of the biggest banks in the world, the Swiss bank. He was in the UAE this week at the Abu Dhabi Finance Week, where I also covered the event for FinNews, Swisswire FinNews. And Sergio Ermotti, the CEO of UBS Bank, said, quote, the investors might lose patience with some AI stocks and with the whole AI development, which is very bullish, extremely bullish. And he also recommended for 2026, and now this is important, he said, leaves a good portion of cash on the side for 2026. He's a top banker of UBS Bank, of the biggest bank, one of the biggest banks in the world. Does he know something more than us? Keeping cash on the side means the air gets thinner and thinner, and we take away that also the Fed sees sooner or later here a cool down and asset inflation. We know there's not only inflation for goods which you buy in the grocery, but there's also asset inflation, and asset inflation has been rising very much. That cannot go forever, and also President Trump, as a businessman, knows that very well.
All right, Gerard, let's also talk about how will the latest Fed cuts affect the lives of everyday Americans and their finances?
Well, lower interest rates, as you said, means a lower price for credits. The interest rate is the price of the credit. The price of money is that if you have money that you don't have the goods which you can buy for them. So that means your credit card costs will be lower. Homeowners can buy homes for lower mortgages, for lower rates and loans. And of course, the lower dollar means you can import less, or you have to pay more for imports, because a lower dollar means a stronger Swiss franc, a stronger euro, a stronger yen, and so on. That means importing goods will be more expensive, but here's the thing, President Trump prefers America first, buy American products, buy American services, and I think this also is in line with his policy. If you buy domestic goods which have been domestically produced, of course they are then also cheaper in relation to credit.
All right, and how are these cuts going to affect the global economy and the global markets?
Global markets, as said, the foreign exchange rates are now in favor of the other currencies, the non-dollar currencies such as euro, yen, Swiss franc. Swiss franc very bullish now, and that means it's cheaper to travel to the US if the currency stays so strong. You have good purchasing power if you go to the US next year to the FIFA World Cup, for example. On the other hand, this means that also there's an expectation of a cooling down of the world economy, which could be a sign of holding investments, which could indicate that people will hold investments back. So if you are more cautious, definitely you will invest less. You might not run into the stock market with that euphoria as we have seen this year or the last year. And the global economy also, I think China and Europe will emerge stronger from this development, because they have adapted to the tariff dispute this year, but also to the lower dollar.
And I'm going to ask you a very basic question now. Are rate cuts mainly benefiting the wealthy rather than the wage earners?
Well, the happy few, of course, they also will benefit. Do they benefit more? I'm not sure, because they're also heavily invested in AI and in the stock market and also in the debt market. That market, interest rates are lower, is not a good sign, because if you buy into bonds, you will earn less. But it's hard to tell. Again, going back to the quote by the UBS CEO, Mr. Sergio Armotti, he recommends to have a good portion of cash in the next 12 to 24 months. That means the well-to-do have to be careful and cautious. We had seen knockout effects in 2008 and 2009 during the last financial crisis, but also during the internet bubble when it got burst in March 2000. So it's hard to tell, but you can diversify, of course, your portfolio better if you have more capital on your bank account, and also diversified already in gold, property, agriculture, debt markets, cryptocurrencies. This is something the normal wage owner cannot do.
All right, Gerard, would you say that Trump's pressure on Powell is influencing the Fed policy decisions?
It's hard to tell. I mean, definitely there is pressure. There is verbal pressure. There is gesture economics behind this. You mentioned that the vote was not unanimous, which is, I think, a good sign, because it shows that the checks and balances work. The Constitution of the United States does not require unanimous votes by the Fed, but of course there can be disputes. The disputes can be public. The disagreements can be public, must be public in a democracy. Also shows that the U.S. is not a monarchy, as some people state. Definitely there is pressure. It will continue, and President Trump will continue his policy of America first.
All right, and my final question to you, as an economist, what do you think? What should the Fed prioritize, jobs, inflation, or economic stability?
Per the Constitution, the Fed's mission is to keep the economy running and not so much the inflation like the European Central Bank has to focus on. So keeping interest rates low means, yes, we anticipate that the heat goes out of the markets, of the asset inflation, stock markets, also cryptocurrencies. But the Fed must focus on the consumer. The consumer is the critical factor in the United States, in the biggest economy of the world, and that's the mission that will remain. The mission: inflation might rise because of lower interest rates, but keep the economy running. That's the Fed's mission.
All right, Gerard, thank you for that discussion. Very meaningful insights that we've gotten from you. And viewers, with that, it's a wrap on this episode of A Deep Dive. But stay tuned for more.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reforms, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws, and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination. And if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reforms, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws, and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
Hello and welcome. I'm Kriti Mehta and you're watching Primetime Asia on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines this hour. Hong Kong's High Court is all set to hand down a verdict in the trial of media tycoon and China critic Jimmy Lai. Lai has pleaded not guilty to two national security law charges of conspiracy. In a major step to boost ties with China, India is all set to issue Chinese business visas within a month. In response, China has lauded the move as a positive action from India to facilitate people-to-people exchange. Bangladeshi President Mohammad Shahabuddin has said that he plans to step down midway through his term, saying he has felt humiliated by the interim government. Hong Kong leader has said that the independent investigation into the recent high-rise building fire that killed 116 people will conclude within 9 months. Nepal's anti-graft protests in September has reportedly caused more than $586 million in losses to Nepal's $42 billion economy, as per the government of Nepal. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, while hosting Brunei's second Minister of Foreign Affairs, has shared that China is ready to work with Brunei to maintain high-level exchanges and collaboration to further accelerate China-Brunei ties. Thailand's king has endorsed a royal decree to dissolve the lower house of parliament, paving the way for a general election early next year. The decree was countersigned by Prime Minister Charan Virakul, who cited his administration's status as a minority government as the primary reason for the dissolution. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has lashed out at the U.S. raid on a Venezuelan oil tanker. The U.S. maintains that the seizure of the tanker took place due to the fact that it was ferrying sanctioned oil between Venezuela and Iran. And viewers, let's start with the top focus here on Primetime Asia. Now, Hong Kong is set to deliver a major national security verdict on the 15th of December in the closely watched trial of pro-democracy media tycoon Jimmy Lai. The 78-year-old founder of the now shuttered Apple Daily has been in jail since 2020, but much of it in solitary confinement. He faces charges of foreign collusion and seditious publication, offences that could put him behind bars for life. Journalists and supporters have already begun lining up outside the West Kowloon courthouse ahead of the ruling. The trial, running for 2 years despite expectations of just 30 days, has drawn strong criticism from Western governments and press freedom groups who call it politically motivated. China says it firmly supports Hong Kong in punishing acts that threaten national security. Meanwhile, Lai's family and rights groups voice growing concerns about his deteriorating health behind bars. Let's listen to what the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Guo Zhikun had said.
"维护国家主权、安全、发展利益是一国两制的最高原则。中央政府坚定支持香港特区依法维护国家安全，惩治危害国家安全的犯罪行为。"
And now joining me in this discussion is Satoru Nagao, who is a fellow at the Hudson Institute of Tokyo. Thank you, Mr. Nagao, for joining me here at NewsX World. Mr. Nagao, this particular case involves 2 charges of conspiracy against nation and infringing on national security. What's the highest sentence that could be granted?
There's a possibility. Many could happen, but any verdict is something illogical view from us, because Jimmy Lai did not do any wrong thing. Just analysis and correct information and publish as the media. That is professionalism. So that is not the problem. Only China think this is a problem. And if the China believes there is a 2 systems in one country, and this is not logical, because this Jimmy Lai did not harm any law in the Hong Kong. But that is law came from China is a problem. So law itself is a problem, not Jimmy Lai the problem. So that is a very important step and symbolic step, influential step. China is not respecting the rule of Hong Kong they promised, and China is authoritarian, not allow the people to say anything against the government. That is what happened, what will happen about it.
All right, I respect your opinion, but as far as China is concerned, it thinks it's treason that Jimmy Lai is accused of. But if he's convicted and he's granted the highest punishment, which could be a life term, what option does Lai then have? Is he expected to reach out to international courts and actors for an appeal against any such verdict?
In this case, of course, the country around China should realize China is dangerous, risky neighbor, and try to coordinate against China and try to persuade the Chinese who have the will to resist the Chinese authority. So that these are the maybe reaction we can do against China just now. Because the Chinese government do not care about the reputation about it, and because of this, China is provoking not only the domestic audience against the government, but also the country around China who face the threat of China. So they do not worry about reputation, just do it is their attitude. But in the long run, it will harm China's interest itself, because such kind of reputation, a fixed reputation, what the kind of the government China is, it will harm the Chinese government themselves, I think. So that's why China should realize this so other countries should show the sort kind of message by attitude of the cooperation each other. That is my opinion.
All right. Thank you for your opinion and perspective there, Mr. Nagao. But do stay on. Viewers, let's now give some news from India. India is speeding up business visas for Chinese professionals, cutting a key layer of red tape and slashing approval times to under a month. It marks a major shift after New Delhi tightens scrutiny following the 2020 border clash. The move comes as Prime Minister Narendra Modi cautiously rebuilds ties with Beijing while navigating steep US tariffs on Indian goods. Meanwhile, China has welcomed the decision, saying it has noticed positive action, calling the step in the interests of both parties and adding that it is willing to maintain communication and cooperation to improve bilateral ties. Indian industries say long visa delays cost billions in lost daily production, especially in electronics and solar manufacturing. The easing follows Modi's first visit to China in 7 years and a broader push to boost foreign investment by relaxing curbs on China. And now moving on, viewers, US Defense Minister Pete Hegseth and his Japanese counterpart Shinjiro Koizumi have held a call earlier today, and both have collectively agreed that Beijing's recent actions are indeed aggressive and are significantly harming peace and stability in East Asia. This comes after a Chinese aircraft logged radar on Japanese jets near Taiwan on the 6th of December last week. According to Japanese officials, there were 2 such incidents last Saturday off its southern Okinawa Islands, and it caused Japan to scramble its jets in what it claimed was a necessary rebuttal. Moreover, this week also saw repeated Chinese-Russian air patrols around Japan, which further escalated tension in the Indo-Pacific region. Additionally, during the call with the US Defense Minister, Shinjiro Koizumi has reportedly said that China was spreading wrong facts about the radar incident. He's also added that Japan does not want tension to rise in the region and is reacting in a restrained manner while also keeping the channel open for dialogue. And I'd now request Satoru Mr. Nagao to join us back into the discussion here. Mr. Nagao, now interesting that US seems to be understanding the Japanese cause, is even when Russian and Chinese jets were seen holding exercises together in the region. But what do you see US policy shaping up in this regard against China, particularly after its new national security strategy document was released, and one that indicates that China may not any longer be the #1 enemy of the United States?
When we talk about the national security strategy of the United States recently published, they do not overemphasize China, but still the emphasis China as the main competitor against the United States, most important competitor. So that's why some people pointed out, compared with the last national security strategy, the existence of China is a little bit maybe smaller, but at the same time, still China is the main target, is right. So that's why we should not overestimate the size of China's world international security strategy in this case. Anyway, the main target is China, and China is challenge against the United States. So, but in this case, why the U.S. support? When we check the move of the Chinese aircraft carrier and the strategic bomber of China and Russia, indeed they are running the similar course. But if such kind of the big weapon is moving, not only Japan but also U.S. is taking the move of the China side. So that's why when this aircraft carriers, fighter jet, use the radar against the Japanese fighter jet, and it looks like the process to fire the missile, that is dangerous move. That is recorded not only by Japan but also by United States too. So that's why US know what really happened in this region. And so that is what China did, and this is the wrong thing. Maybe as a third party, US can say. And the view from the U.S. strategy, indeed, this is not a concerning point because if the U.S. supports Japan's move or Taiwan's move too much, the U.S. view from the United States used to worry about declaration of the independence came from Taiwan. So that's why, of course, we do not need to worry too much, I think, but at the same time, this is a traditional concern with the U.S. side, and the U.S. worry about. So that's why they try to hide their real intention. But President Trump clearly say if China invade Taiwan, what will happen is very clear and disastrous or something like that he has already mentioned. And this is a clear message, China must not invade Taiwan. And in case of the China's ways, we should not forget, because of there is a pattern, that's why this time China's wrong is easy to expect. Because what China did is, every time China did wrong thing first, after that, if the target did not claim China's activity, every time it is okay for China. But if the target country claims China's activity was wrong, in this case they try to legitimize by using the many small reasons and claim to the claimer. So that is the pattern. So that was happened recently. They did against the British, and July they did against Germany. And 2022 against the Philippines by using the target tracer. In 22, they do it against Australia, America, Vietnam, Taiwan, South Korea, and also, of course, they did against India. So that's why every time they did the same thing, and every time we see the same pattern, which is first something that they did, after that, claim to claimer. So that's why this time same.
Yeah, I get your point, Mr. Nagawa, and I thank you for sharing it with us. And with that, viewers, we're now going to move on to talks between the United States and India. Now, India and the US are moving forward with trade deal negotiations, but agriculture continues to be a major obstacle. India has firmly refused to allow US agricultural products such as wheat, pulses, and almonds into its market. The Indian government argues that importing US farm goods would harm local farmers and reduce their income. Despite this, progress is being made in other sectors. India is prepared to boost purchases of American defense equipment, energy supplies, and aviation products. However, agriculture remains off the table, with India emphasizing that food security and rural incomes cannot be compromised. The US has pushed for broader access to Indian markets, particularly for agricultural products, where India remains resolute in its stance. Talks are expected to focus on areas like technology, manufacturing, and services, with the hope of advancing the deal without compromising agriculture. And for this discussion, I'd like to request Sharath Kohli, who's an economist, to join us. Thank you, Mr. Kohli, for joining us here at NewsX World. We do appreciate you taking time out for us. Now, it's very crucial how India's reaction to accessing the farm market is concerned. Do you think the approach that India seems to be taking is prudent, one that would protect our domestic farmers, or how do you see it, especially after the US Trade Representative Jameson Greer, who had held talks, had said that it's the best possible offer, the best ever market access offer, as high stakes trade talks are still expected.
Greetings, Kriti. Greetings to the viewers of NewsX World. I think India's stance is very clear. It's been very consistent, very stable from the beginning. We have drawn a red line. We are primarily an agriculture-driven economy. 50 to 60% of our population in India still directly or indirectly depend on agriculture. We are a food-sufficient country. We are called the world's food basket. We do not need agriculture, especially we don't need genetically modified crops, which US tries to sell here. So I just fail to understand, because this is, discussion number 6, 7, 8, whatever. And the same thing keeps cropping up. I fail to understand why US is not able to understand that the structure of our economy is such that we cannot allow US crops to be sold here. US also wants to send dairy products here. India is the largest dairy producer in the world. And you know, the dairy products in the US do contain non-vegetarian content because the cattle is fed with meat remains. 35% of India, because of cultural and religious reasons, you know, are vegetarian. So we cannot allow those dairy products into India. We cannot allow agri products as well. So US is trying to sell soya bean, US is trying to sell maize, corn. I don't think India is going to allow. US will have to understand that any trade deal which happens, Kriti, will have to be within these limitations and restrictions. India is maybe willing to agree on certain other things, but definitely not on agriculture, because we've got a very large farm community which remains under distress. Many a times the government is compensating them rupees 2,000 every 4 months. We cannot allow. They will be in further distress if we allow. It's going to cause havoc in the country. So US will have to understand, and the sooner they do, the quicker the deal will happen, Kriti.
All right, and I don't think there's any contention there, because even like I said, the US representative had said that it's the best ever deal that the US could get from India, and I do think that it's a rather prudent stance that India is taking. Also, you would agree to that. But I now request you to stay on with us. There's now news from Pakistan that I'd request your opinion on. Viewers, let's first tell you that the International Monetary Fund has imposed 11 new conditions on Pakistan as part of the second review of its $7 billion bailout, taking the total number of conditions to 64 in just 18 months. The measures target governance, anti-corruption, fiscal and structural reforms to tackle what the International Monetary Fund calls deep-rooted distortions in Pakistan's economy. Key requirements include asset declarations for senior federal and provincial officials by December 2026, with banks granted access to detect discrepancies between income and assets. IMF also demands sector reforms, strengthened provincial anti-corruption powers, and other measures to reduce losses in critical sectors. These steps aim to address entrenched corruption, governance weakness, and structural economic imbalances, while improving transparency and accountability across government institutions. And I now request Mr. Kohli to join us back into the discussion here. Mr. Kohli, now it's not any other country, but the IMF itself that's pointing out to the deep-rooted corruption in Pakistan's institutions. Do you think it will be able to meet the IMF conditions and criteria in the stipulated time period?
Well, Kriti is going to do window dressing. I don't think, because corruption is far deep-rooted to be mended in such a short time. And what surprises me, Kriti, here is that IMF is very well aware of corruption in Pakistan, but Pakistan has got some of its friends in the Western world. Well, US is one of them. We see Asif Munir and Shahbaz Sharif going and having biryani at White House. So I think they have a friend in President Trump for various reasons. He's got his crypto business in Pakistan. There is World Liberty Finance, which belongs to the family of some of the family members of President Trump, which has got a Pakistan Crypto Council set up over there. So obviously it's getting funded. It is getting aid from IMF. US has a very substantial say in the IMF. 25 bailouts is what Pakistan has got since 1958, Kriti. And as per me, it should not have got any bailout, but obviously it has got some vested interest, or shall I say the Western world has got some vested interest in Pakistan. They feel that Pakistan's geographic and strategic location can probably help them at some point of time. Pakistan chaos helps them for various reasons, which they know better. But then this bailout, as an economist, I can say Pakistan does not deserve this bailout, because apart from the condition of corruption, they have also suggested, tax reforms, because there is massive tax evasion in Pakistan. IMF has also recommended reforms in the corporate governance, because the companies there are not being governed as per the international corporate governance norms. If Pakistan makes these 11 or 12 changes, well, it is probably going to sail through. But I have a feeling, Kriti, very honestly speaking, they will sail through anyway, because they're just going to do window dressing and show to IMF, look, we've done this, we've done that, as has happened on 25 other occasions in the past. I mean, it's a very sorry state of affairs that a country which harbors terrorism, a country which breeds terrorism, which is a terrorism factory of the world, keeps getting bailout after bailout, year after year, for last so many years. A very sorry state of affairs as of now, Kriti, is what I would like to say.
And it's now also, like you would have read, planning to sell out its national carrier, Pakistan International Airlines, for IMF loans. What are the other dire steps that it might be forced to take for IMF loans?
Well, none of the economic parameters in Pakistan are anywhere near satisfactory level. The GDP is not doing well. Unemployment is rampant. Poverty is up on the streets. People crave for two times food during the day. Education is in a pathetic state. Healthcare is in a very bad state. Agriculture is in a very bad state. No foreign investment comes into Pakistan. Pakistan rupee versus dollar internationally, it is in an absolute say. Pakistan Stock Exchange in Karachi does not stand anywhere. None of the economic parameters, it doesn't have foreign exchange reserves, by the way, which is why bailouts come. None of the economic parameters and high frequency indicators, Kriti, point towards a country which can probably drive on its own. So what Pakistan does is take one loan, return the loan from the previous one, or borrow from Saudi Arabia, borrow from China, borrow from Turkey. Pakistan has some friends who keep helping, I think, for their own interest. It is not because Pakistan is a very good country. Pakistan is a very successful country. For me, economically speaking, Kriti, Pakistan is a failed state. It is simply surviving on loan after loan, bailout after bailout, which it does not deserve by any means.
I'm sure. Thank you for your opinion there, Mr. Kohli, and for that insightful conversation with NewsX World. And let's shift our focus now. It's been 11 years now since the disappearance of the Malaysian Airlines flight MH370. 239 people were on board, and the situation remains one of the world's greatest aviation mysteries. The Boeing 777 went missing on its way from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing on March 8 in 2014. More than 150 Chinese passengers and 50 Malaysians were on the flight, as well as citizens of France, Australia, Indonesia, India, the US, Ukraine and Canada, among others. Jiang Xiaoyun was one of the 239 people aboard the flight. Her son Jiang Hui recalled her waving goodbye before boarding her Malaysia Airlines flight, a bag on her shoulder, as she promised to return with souvenirs. The son, who is still looking for answers, had this to say. Listen in.
不去法院做死亡宣告，不亲口承认亲人已经死亡了，这23个人将得不到任何1分钱的赔偿。我觉得这个是，也包括我在内，我觉得这个是让我去承认我的母亲，在没有任何证据的情况下，让我去宣告她死亡，这个让我很难接受。我觉得这不是很人道的事情，而且在我们认为，不管是中国法律还是世界的法律，都有它有温度的一面，但是我们没有感觉到这个法律的温度。
That's a wrap on Primetime Asia. Thank you for staying tuned to NewsX World for all international news and updates.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
Hello and welcome Welcome, I'm Sima Katauka and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has lashed out at the U.S. raid on a Venezuelan oil tanker. The U.S. maintains that the seizure of the oil tanker took place due to the fact that it was ferrying sanctioned oil between Venezuela and Iran. Russian President Vladimir Putin has met with his counterparts at the Central Asia Summit in Turkmenistan, where he has praised the country for its neutral stand on the region. Mexico's Senate has approved the hikes of tariff rates imposed on several Asian countries, including India and China. The move is expected to hurt foreign imports with rates of up to 50% levied on different countries. Thailand's king has endorsed a royal decree to dissolve the lower house of parliament, paving the way for a general election early next year. The decree was countersigned by Prime Minister Shari Virako, cited his administration's status as a minority government as the primary reason for the dissolution. According to a Japanese Defense Ministry release, Japan's Defense Minister Shinjiro Koizumi and his U.S. counterpart Pete Hegseth spoke on the phone on Friday about the recent confrontation between Chinese and Japanese self-defense force fighter jets. As Tokyo said, it did not seek to escalate the tensions. However, China blames Japan that it is escalating the tensions. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, while hosting Brunei's second Minister of Foreign Affairs, has shared that China is ready to work with Brunei to maintain high-level exchanges and collaboration to further accelerate China-Brunei ties. The Chinese Foreign Ministry has announced that Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi will visit the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and Jordan from today to 16 December. This trip comes as he was invited by all the three Arab nations and has accepted the invitation. Gaza's 1.5 million displaced Palestinians are facing a new disaster as Storm Byron hits flooding makeshift tents and causes deadly exposure, including the death of an infant amid 2 years of Israel's relentless war and mass displacement. Now for this hour, we start with America's. The U.S. imposed new sanctions on Thursday, targeting three nephews of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro's wife, Celia Flores, as well as 6 oil tankers and shipping companies linked to the regime. The U.S. Treasury Department said the sanctions were aimed at entities involved in deceptive and unsafe shipping practices and fueling Maduro's corrupt narco-terrorist regime. The sanctions are part of a broader effort to increase pressure on Venezuela as tensions rise following the recent seizure of a sanctioned oil tanker by U.S. authorities. The targeted individuals include Franqui Flores and Efrain Antonio Campo Flores, who were arrested in 2015 for attempting to orchestrate a drug deal. A third nephew, Carlos Eric Malpica Flores, was also sanctioned for alleged corruption linked to Venezuela's state oil company, PDVSA. The sanctions coincide with U.S. President Donald Trump's intensifying campaign to oust Maduro and are part of a larger U.S. military buildup in the southern Caribbean. Experts warned that these actions could disrupt Venezuela's oil exports, forcing the country to offer deeper discounts to buyers or lose customers entirely. Now for these discussions, we welcome Professor Collins Chongyu Keith. He's a Foreign Affairs, Security and Strategy Analyst, joins us live from University Malaya, Kuala Lumpur. Thank you very much, Professor, for joining us again.
You're welcome.
Good to see you. Now looking at this, how might this U.S. sanctions on Maduro's, family members, what do you think, what's the strategy behind this and also associated oil entities? How do you think this will further impact Venezuela and U.S. relations?
Yes, this is not symbolic. It is targeted both financially and strategically. And of course, US is tightening the screws where it hurts the most: money, oil, and family networks. The real test will be whether this sustained enforcement will follow, because we all know that sanctions only work if they are relentlessly being policed, being monitored, being observed. But we have seen how this move to sanction family members, it signals Washington's, assessment that corruption and sanction evasion are deeply personal and network-based, and they are not just institutional or structural. So the inner circle of Maduro has been accused of money laundering, oil revenues, using relatives and proxies to bypass restrictions. So the message being sent is clear and loud enough that there will be no safe haven, even through blood ties, and that we have seen also how the survival of Venezuela has also depended heavily on shadow oil exports, using ship-to-ship transfers, obscure ownership structures and reflect vessels. So all these are in the radar of Washington. So by sanctioning specific tankers, U.S. also is raising the cost and the risk of transporting the crude oil of Venezuela. So making these ports, insurers, intermediaries to think twice before committing this act. So the timing of this whole thing is also important, where Venezuela has been accused of quietly increasing their oil exports despite the sanctions in place, exploiting this global energy tightness and demand. So by this measure, I think Washington is, through Trump, is signaling that this tolerance is now over, especially where Maduro has shown little movement or efforts on the factor of reforms, democratic reforms, or free and fair elections. So this is also part of the alignment of the broader U.S. efforts to to reassert sanctions as a very credible tool, especially under the Trump administration.
And Professor, as we have seen this escalate from both sides, but particularly from Venezuela's side, we haven't seen any move that compares to what U.S. has been doing towards Venezuela, except just name calling or asking UN to be involved. So could this move by U.S. now further, all in all, potentially provoke retaliatory measures from Venezuela?
We have seen quite a subdued response from Maduro, and of course his administration for now. Of course, there will be public defiance, there will be nationalist rhetoric, there will be also some quiet attempts to reroute maybe tankers or to use intermediaries, and of course these have been anticipated by Washington, and of course also Washington has also expected the Maduro administration to seek greater fallback options and support and protection from other non-Western partners who are in need of the crude oil. But each workaround, each fallback option, strategic maneuvering also becomes more expensive and less efficient. As if we were to compare to efforts before, and also they risk also having this being used as a pretext by Washington also to increase the efforts to target these movements. And we have seen also how there have been prior discussions, there have been prior talks between Maduro and Trump personally. And I would argue that Maduro is well aware of the repercussions if you were to increase the efforts of defiance. And so far we have seen little open defiance, and of course we have seen little also actions being taken to have this direct confrontation with the U.S. forces. And responses have been confined mainly to this little fallout in terms of the impact. So I won't see any kind of harsh measures in place, responses, unless there's a shift in the strategic response by Maduro. But for now, it means to show that the Washington's efforts are being used as a real attempt by the Trump administration to target the things that matter the most, to stop the trafficking, to stop the movement of these illicit goods, and of course also to protect the interests of not only America, but also to secure the overall needs and the interests and stability of Latin America as a whole.
Yes, we will be eyeing that. Thank you very much. With that, I would like to thank Professor Collins for joining us and sharing that insight. Now we move on to Europe. In an overnight drone attack, Russia has struck energy facilities in the south Ukrainian Odessa region, injuring 6 people and also causing fire and blackouts. The local governor has reported that the drone attack has led to power outage in several settlements across the region, especially where Ukraine's main seaports are located. Officials have observed that Russia has intensified its attacks on Ukraine's energy sector and infrastructure in recent weeks, mainly targeting power stations and railway hubs. This creates huge complications for Ukraine as winter is deepening and people are often left without electricity in the aftermath of these incidents. Moreover, Ukraine's biggest power company, DTEK, has issued a formal statement today, saying that one of its substations was also hit during the attacks. DTEK has recently restored power to about 40,000 customers, while 90,000 customers still remain without it. Now for this discussion, we welcome retired Major General Sudhakarji. He's an international relations and defense expert, joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much, Major General, for joining us again. Good to see you. Now, you know, the escalation has been ongoing once again from both sides. How do you think this is jeopardizing any efforts made by US or other countries to bring these two closer to peace?
Suma, good afternoon. Thank you for getting me for your show.
Thank you.
As regards your question, definitely it is not taking any effort closer to peace. Any kind of breach of security or extension of the conflict definitely does not augur well in the direction of making peace. Therefore, ideally speaking, in my opinion, while the end state desirable is peace and harmony and stability in the region, to reach the end state, we have to select the means and methods. And means and methods, one of the inalienable or one of the important component is to bring ceasefire into effect. When I say ceasefire, both the stakeholders, they have to freeze all activities, stop firing at each other, and that's the way in military science you do peacemaking. Peacemaking is not done by selecting the end state and you allow the conflict to go on and keep on raging violent activities against each other. So therefore, to answer your question, let me summarize my articulation that it is not taking anywhere closer to peace. Back to you, Asuma.
Right. And, you know, how do you think this, we also saw last week that the attacks also, Ukraine striked a ship, a shadow fleet in Black Sea. Now, how dangerous is it for all parties involved and I mean, in Black Sea, using Black Sea as, central to their ship lines? How do you think this is escalating, and do you think that Turkey and other nations for whom this Black Sea is very important, do you think they will also say something about this now?
Yeah, good. I'm glad you have raised the point. Hidden in your articulation is a question as to the Russia has started striking Odessa. Odessa is a port. It's a major port of Ukraine. If Odessa goes, Ukraine also will go. So it's about 50 kilometers away from the nearest point of contact in Kherson. Kherson, as you know, it dominates the entry point into Crimea, and Russia has already occupied quite a major portion of Kherson. And as per the peace proposal, the point of contact will be taken as a line of freezing all activities in future if at all peace comes into effect. From that point of contact between Ukraine and Russia, the nearest distance to Odessa is around 50 kilometers. In your channel, maybe Thomas was the anchor, I had predicted that Russia is definitely going to strike Odessa and it will deny berthing or marshalling or docking of any kind of vessels, be it the naval fleet or the commercial fleet's vessels coming up to Odisha, because it would aim to deny any access to Ukraine into the Black Sea. By doing so, it will be isolating Ukraine from all sides, and it will cut off Ukraine from outside world as far as the naval resources or maritime resources are concerned. That is going to be a major blow to Ukraine if that is allowed to happen. 50 kilometers is not a big distance, and it can be traversed in a very, very reduced, condensed time frame, so it is dangerous. Now, why is it not happening? Why, if Odisha is the objective, why isn't Russia attacking it from the Black Sea? It is not attacking from Black Sea because Ukraine has got sufficient quantum of anti-ship missiles. Now, anti-ship missiles in the past 3.5 years, they have been engaging them with punitive accuracy, and they have destroyed quite a few major ships, warships, as also the commercial vessels of Russia. So therefore, there is a danger that if at all the intention and the objective of capture of Odisha is there in the minds of the commanders of Russia, it is unlikely to build this offensive or attack from the seaside, Black side. It is most likely going to be built up from the continental direction, that is from Kherson side. 50 kilometers is a distance. By mechanized means, they can cover it in 2 days. It is going to surround Odisha by the third night, and fourth night they would have consolidated. That is the kind of a threat, and more than that also, Asoma,
Yes.
if you allow me, north of or northwest of Odisha is a province called a Moldova. Now, Moldova and Ukraine, there is a narrow strip called as Tritistian. Now, they
Yes,
have
General.
common border with Odisha and Ukraine. That also is going to be, it is under the dominance of Russia, and so Russia will be able to put pressure on 2.5 sides, one from Kherson,
Major
one
General.
from Moldova side, and the other one from Black Sea to capture Odisha. If that is what the long-term objective and aim.
Major General, thank you for sharing that, but unfortunately we're running out of time for this discussion, but please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now, moving on to India. India is speeding up business visas for Chinese professionals, cutting a key layer of red tape and slashing approval times to under a month. It marks a major shift after New Delhi tightened scrutiny following the 2020 border clash. The move comes as Prime Minister Narendra Modi cautiously rebuilds ties with Beijing while navigating steep US tariffs on Indian goods. Meanwhile, China has welcomed the decision, saying it has noticed positive action, calling the step in the interest of both parties, and adding that it is willing to maintain communication and cooperation to improve bilateral ties. Now, Indian industries say long visa delays cost billions in lost production, especially in electronics and solar manufacturing. The easing follows Modi's first visit to China in 7 years and a broader push to boost foreign investment by relaxing curbs on China. Now, for this discussion, we welcome back retired Major General Sudhakarji. He's an international relations and defense expert, joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much, Major General, for staying with us. Now, looking at this, how can India and China both balance and both benefit from this India's decision to fast-track business visas for Chinese professionals?
See, Asoma, excellent question you are raising. Everything in international relations is driven by national interest.
Yes.
In the instant case, the national interest of India, I would say for the first time in independent India, the nation has been able to formulate a long-term prospective objective, and that is to become a global power by 2047 or earlier than that. And also, the goal has been to large an extent crystallized $30 trillion economy by 2047. And we also have tried to define that the per capita income should rise from $2,800 as of now, approximately, to a figure of $14,000 to $20,000. That is the the bottom line parameter defined by the UN agencies to become a global power. So in order to achieve that, the economy has to develop at a rate more than, I would say, 10% per annum. We are very fortunate to have 8.2%, and all the vital parameters of the economy are looking healthy and bright. And I would say the building blocks are very strong, and we are shining and growing in a very, very progressive manner. India hopes to achieve that target, provided the ifs and buts are addressed. What are the ifs and buts? The ifs and buts are that a case in point is the Foxconn industry, which basically used to assemble I-17 mobile phones. Now, in order to assemble those mobile phones, there are 300 scientists and technicians who are working in Tamil Nadu province of India without any written instructions. By a word of mouth, suddenly they get some directions from China, and in no time, all 300 who are working in the factory, they go missing. They are found going back to China. So if these are the kinds of things, then they are going to be eased out and addressed in a holistic manner. I'm glad and very, very proud that the government of India has taken this decision after due deliberation to focus on the growth of economy, and particularly the electronic industry. And this is going to go a great way in not only in addressing our economic objective, also contributing towards balance of power in the region, as it has happened with Russia's president coming, Putin, and it has shaken up the Western Hemisphere. With China, visa easing out with China, it is going to give sleepless nights to Western Hemisphere, particularly, I would say, United States of America. Back to you, please.
Totally, that is so interesting, and yes, US will be definitely looking at it as maybe being jealous towards this. But thank you very much. With that, I would like to thank Major General Sudhakarji for always joining us and sharing that insight. Now we focus on to Oceania. The Australian Health Minister Mark Butler has said that the Australian government will stand firm to protect its citizens after Reddit has filed a lawsuit in Australia's High Court seeking to overturn Australia's social media ban for children under the age of 16. The San Francisco-based firm Reddit, which ranks Australia among its biggest market, has said that while High Court filing that the ban should be declared invalid because it has interfered with free political communication implied by Australia's constitution, setting the stage for a protracted legal battle. Meanwhile, Mark Butler has responded. Let's listen into what he has shared.
Let's be clear, that shouldn't come as no surprise. Across our history, when our governments have taken strong action to protect citizens against highly addictive, highly damaging products, they've usually been challenged in the courts by the companies that profit most from them. But the idea that this is some action by Reddit to protect the political freedoms of young people is a complete crock.
Now we move on to Hong Kong. Hong Kong is pushing to uncover the truth behind a devastating high-rise fire that killed at least 160 people and displaced thousands. The city's leader, John Lee, has said that an independent investigation will wrap up within 9 months. The probe is led by Judge David Locke and will look at possible systematic failures in construction, conflicts of interest, and even bid rigging. Authorities say substandard renovation materials helped fuel the blaze, which burned for nearly 2 days. Public anger is growing, and the government has launched both criminal and corruption investigations, promising institutional reform to restore trust. That's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with the U.S. a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination. And if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with the U.S. a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together